Everyone threw the stones away, but he built a wall that blocked the wind and doubled the harvest. Arthur Harrison was on his knees in the middle of the dry field, his hands bleeding as he tried to yank out yet another stone that refused to come loose. 3 straight lost harvests had pushed the family to the brink of ruin, and now the Heartland Bank was threatening to take everything. His wife, Martha, had been at the county medical centre for weeks with an illness no one could properly diagnose, and the doctors had already warned that without the expensive treatment, she wouldn't make it through the winter. It was then that he looked up and saw his oldest son, Caleb, standing there with a man in a suit Arthur recognized right away. It was Silas Sterling, the merchant who had been buying up all the failing farms in the region for ridiculous prices. The 23-year-old had that look in his eyes, the kind of determination that only comes after a decision has already been made. "Dad, you need to sign these papers," Caleb said, holding out a folder of documents. "Mr. Silas is offering a fair price. It's enough to pay off the county medical centre bills, and there's still something left over so we can start over somewhere else." Arthur wiped the sweat from his face with his dirt-stained arm and slowly got to his feet. His knees popped, reminding him of the 47 years he carried in his tired body. "Fair?" he repeated, looking at the merchant, who smiled smugly. "This man is offering a third of what this land is worth." "Was worth, Dad," Caleb corrected, his voice heavy with frustration. "Was worth before the winds destroyed everything 3 years in a row. Now nobody wants this land. Nobody can grow a thing here." Silas stepped forward, adjusting his jacket. "Your son is being sensible, Mr. Arthur. Look around you. Half your neighbors have already sold and left. The other half are waiting for the next failed harvest so they can do the same. You can be stubborn and lose everything when the Heartland Bank forecloses on the mortgage, or you can accept my offer and at least save your wife." The mention of Martha hurt more than any physical blow. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the hot wind against his face. It was this cursed wind that swept away the fertile soil, tore out the young plants, and turned months of work into dust in a matter of hours. "I'm not selling," he said finally, opening his eyes. Caleb threw the folder to the ground, furious. "So you'd rather let Mom die? Is that it? Your pride is worth more than her life?" "Caleb!" The voice came from the house. It was Clara, the 16-year-old daughter, running toward them with a bucket of water. "Don't talk to Dad like that." "Stay out of this, girl." Caleb pointed his finger at his sister. "You don't understand anything. You're here playing at helping while Mom is dying at the county medical centre." Clara stopped, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't answer. She just looked at her father, waiting. Arthur bent down, picked up the folder from the ground, and handed it back to Silas. "I have a plan," he said simply. The merchant let out a dry laugh. "A plan? Mr. Arthur, with all due respect, you and your neighbors have tried everything these past years. You planted at different times. You tried different seeds, irrigation, fertilizer. Nothing works when the wind carries it all away. There is no plan that can solve that." "Yes, there is." Arthur pointed to the piles of stones marking the boundaries between the properties. "You all look at those stones and see a nuisance, something that gets in the way of planting. That's why you toss them by the side of the road or leave them in piles for the trucks to haul off." "And what do you see?" asked Silas, curious despite his sarcasm. "I see the solution." Caleb crossed his arms, impatient. "What solution, Dad? What are you going to do with stones?" "I'm going to build a wall." Arthur turned and pointed to the north side of the property, the direction the strongest wind came from. "Right there. A wall about 10 feet high, running the entire length of the north side. It'll block the wind before it reaches the crops." The silence that followed was broken by Silas's burst of laughter. Caleb just shook his head, as if he were certain his father had finally lost his mind. "A stone wall?" Silas wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. "Mr. Arthur, are you serious? Do you know how long it'll take to gather enough stones and build a wall that size? Do you know the strength that takes?" "I do." Arthur kept his voice steady. "That's why I'm starting at dawn tomorrow." "Dad, this is insane." Caleb stepped forward, trying to be reasonable. "You don't have time. The bank gave you 60 days. Even if you do manage to build that wall, you won't have money to plant. And Mom needs treatment now, not 2 months from now. Clara finally spoke, her voice low but determined. I'll help, Dad. Caleb turned to his sister, incredulous. You're 16, Clara. You can't haul heavy rocks all day. I'll learn, she looked at Arthur. If Dad says it'll work, I believe him. Something lit up in Arthur's chest. At least one person still believed in him. Silas tucked the folder under his arm and adjusted his hat. Very well, Mr. Arthur. I'll give you 15 more days to come to your senses. When this crazy plan fails and the bank comes calling, my offer will drop by half. Good luck with your stones. The merchant walked off toward his imported car, leaving a cloud of red clay dust behind. Caleb lingered a moment longer, looking at his father with a mixture of anger and despair. You're condemning all of us, he said before leaving. Arthur was left alone with Clara. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. His daughter came closer and touched his arm. Dad, will the wall really work? He looked at her, seeing in the girl's eyes all the faith he no longer found in anyone else. I've been watching, Clara. For the past 3 years, I've paid attention to every detail. The only plants that survive are the ones near some kind of obstacle. A big rock, a fallen log, anything that breaks the wind. If it works on a small scale, it'll work on a large one. And if it doesn't work? Arthur sighed, looking at the barren land that was once so fertile. Then I'll have tried. I'm not giving up without a fight, sweetheart. Your mother is fighting every day at that hospital. It's the least I can do out here. Clara hugged her father, and the two of them stayed like that for a long moment, while the wind blew around them, indifferent to the human drama unfolding. That night, Arthur went to the hospital to visit Martha. She was pale, thinner than ever, hooked up to tubes and machines that beeped constantly. When she saw him walk in, she tried to smile, but even that seemed to take effort. How are things on the farm? She asked in a weak voice. Arthur pulled up a chair and held her hand, which was far too cold. I'm going to build a wall, he said, deciding to be direct. Out of stones. To protect the crops from the wind. He expected skepticism, questions, maybe even for her to ask him to sell and put an end to the suffering. But Martha just squeezed his hand with the little strength she had. You always see things others don't, she whispered. Trust your instincts, Arthur. I trust you. Her words were like a balm. Arthur felt a lump in his throat. Caleb wants to sell. He says I'm condemning the family. Caleb is young. He doesn't understand yet that some fights are worth it, even when they seem impossible. Martha closed her eyes, tired. Promise me something. Anything you want. When you finish the wall, take me to see it. I want to touch those stones that are going to save our family. Arthur kissed his wife's forehead and promised, even though he didn't know if she would live to see that day come. The next morning, before sunrise, Arthur was already on the property. He had slept only 3 hours, but adrenaline kept him awake. He started with the nearest stones, the ones that had been tossed along the boundary with the road. They were large stones, some weighing more than he could carry by himself. He needed a method. He grabbed old wooden boards and built a sort of makeshift sled. He rolled the larger stones onto the sled, tied them with ropes, and pulled. The effort was brutal. Every muscle in his body protested. But he kept going. At 6 in the morning, Clara showed up with a thermos of coffee and biscuits she had made herself. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. I brought breakfast, she said, sitting down on a stone beside him. Arthur stopped to eat, realizing he was starving. As he chewed a biscuit, he looked at the small pile of stones he had managed to move so far. It wasn't even a tenth of what he would need. At the pace I'm going, it'll take 6 months just to gather the material, he admitted. Then let's speed things up. Clara finished eating and stood up. Teach me how to do it. She was slight, but determined. Arthur showed her how to tell which stones could be rolled and which had to be dragged. He showed her how to use the wooden lever to move the bigger ones. Within a few hours, Clara was working with impressive efficiency. Around 9, the curious began to show up. First it was Clint, the neighbor on the east side, who stopped his tractor to watch. "Arthur, what are you doing with all these stones?" "I'm going to build a wall," he answered without stopping work. Clint got off the tractor and walked over, looking at the imaginary line Arthur had marked on the ground with wooden stakes. "A wall? Here?" "That's right. 10 feet high, the entire north side." The neighbor scratched his head, confused. "And what do you want a wall for?" "To block the wind." Clint was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then he started laughing. It wasn't a mean laugh, but one of pure disbelief. "Arthur, did you hit your head? Wind can't be stopped with a stone wall. Wind goes over it, around it, through the cracks. You're wasting your time." "Maybe so," Arthur said, positioning another stone, "but I'm going to try anyway." "Friend, your troubles are messing with your head," Clint said, turning serious. "Sell this land while it's still worth something. Mr. Silas offered me a good price for mine. I'm seriously thinking about taking it." "Do what you think is best, Clint. I'm staying." The neighbor shook his head and headed back to his tractor. But before he left, he shouted, "When you come to your senses, look me up. We can sell our land together and get a better price." Throughout the day, more neighbors showed up. Some openly mocked him, others just shook their heads with pity. Mrs. Gable, the owner of the general store where everyone bought supplies, stopped by to offer her unsolicited opinion. "Arthur, don't take this the wrong way, but that's not going to work. My late husband tried everything around here. He even planted a hedge to block the wind. You know what happened? The wind tore the hedges out by the roots." "Stones don't have roots to tear out," Arthur answered, sweaty but determined, "but they have weight." Mrs. Gable pointed to a particularly large stone. "And when that wall starts getting tall, a strong gust will knock it all down. It'll be dangerous. It might even hurt someone." Clara, who had been listening quietly, decided to defend her father. "My dad knows what he's doing, Mrs. Gable." The woman looked at the girl with an expression that mixed pity and admiration for her loyalty. "I hope you're right, dear. I really do." When the sun set, Arthur and Clara had moved about 2 tons of stones. It seemed like a lot until he looked at the stretch the wall was supposed to cover. Arthur did the math in his head. He would need at least 100 tons of stone to complete the structure he had planned. At home, Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, fiddling with his phone. When he saw his father and sister walk in, dirty and exhausted, he stood up abruptly. "I got a call from Heartland Bank today," he said, his voice tense. "They're speeding up the process. If there's no payment in 30 days, they'll foreclose on the mortgage." 30 days? Arthur felt his stomach churn. "They said 60. Well, they changed their minds. Seems someone convinced them the property is going to lose even more value." It wasn't hard to guess who had convinced the bank. Silas had connections everywhere. "There's still time." Arthur poured himself some water. "I'll speed up the work." "Speed up?" Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "Dad, you spent the whole day hauling stone and barely made a pile. How are you going to build an entire wall in 30 days? "Working day and night if I have to." "That's insane." The young man grabbed his backpack. "I'm not going to stay here watching you destroy what's left of this family. I'm going to my friend Dustin's house. When you finally accept reality, call me." Caleb stormed out, slamming the door. Clara looked at her father, worried. "Is he coming back?" Arthur sighed, feeling the weight of all his 47 years. "Eventually. Caleb is scared, Clara. Scared of losing his mother. Scared of losing the house. Fear makes people react in strange ways." "And you're not scared?" "I'm terrified," Arthur admitted, looking at his own calloused, bruised hands. "But fear can't paralyze me. I have to act." That night Arthur had an idea. If he couldn't carry stones fast enough on his own, he needed help. But no one in the region believed in him, so he would have to look elsewhere. The next day he woke up before sunrise and went to the neighboring town, where he knew there were day laborers who would take any job. He found 3 young, strong men willing to work for an amount Arthur could barely afford. "The work is simple," he explained. "You need to help move stones from one place to another and then help stack them." The men accepted without asking too many questions. Money was money. With the extra help, the pace improved considerably. In 3 days, Arthur had enough material to actually begin construction. But a new problem arose: how to stack the stones so they would stand firm and tall. Arthur wasn't a stonemason. He had never built anything beyond wooden fences. He tried simply stacking the stones on top of one another, but at about 2 feet high the structure was already unstable. That was when he received an unexpected visit. It was a Sunday afternoon when Otis, a man in his early 70s who lived on the property to the south, showed up walking slowly with his cane. Arthur knew him by sight, but they had never talked much. Otis was reserved, a widower, living alone and tending a small vegetable garden. "Good afternoon, Arthur." "Good afternoon, Mr. Otis. How are you doing?" The old man smiled, revealing a few remaining teeth. "I'm old, but I've still got a few years left in me. I came here because I've been watching your work. Every day you're out here moving those stones, trying to raise that wall." Arthur braced himself for another round of criticism and unsolicited advice. "Yeah, everyone thinks I'm crazy." "They're wrong." Otis touched one of the stones with his free hand. "My grandfather built stone walls out in Appalachia, where I was born. Walls that lasted more than 100 years. I learned from him when I was a boy." Arthur felt a flicker of hope. "Do you know how to build stone walls?" "I do, and I came to offer my help." Otis pointed with his cane. "But you're doing it wrong. You've got to pick the right stones for the base, the right stones for the middle, and the right stones for the top. It's not just stacking. There's a technique to it. Can you teach me?" "I can," the old man smiled, "but there's a condition." "What is it?" "Nobody can know I'm helping. I'm old, Arthur, but I'm not a fool. If the neighbors find out I'm on your side, they'll start pressuring me too. I'd rather they think I'm just observing." Arthur extended his hand. "Deal." From that afternoon on, Otis started showing up after the other workers had gone home. He taught Arthur how to pick stones that fit together better, how to leave strategic gaps for rainwater to drain, how to lean the wall slightly backward for more stability. "A well-built wall doesn't need mortar," Otis explained. "The weight of the stones themselves, if positioned correctly, holds everything in place. It's geometry and physics, son." Within a week, the wall was starting to take real shape. It was already almost 5 feet high in some sections, and Arthur could finally picture the end result. But problems kept coming. The day laborers he'd hired started missing work, saying other farmers in the area were offering more money. Arthur suspected Silas was behind it, sabotaging his work indirectly. Clara tried to make up for it, carrying smaller stones and helping however she could, but she was visibly exhausted. Arthur worried his daughter might get sick from the strain. One afternoon, while working alone since the day laborers hadn't shown up, Arthur heard voices approaching. It was a group of men from town, led by Clint. "Arthur, we need to talk," Clint said, looking uncomfortable. "Go ahead." "We're worried about this wall of yours." One of the men stepped forward. It was Harlan, who owned the property to the north. "The town hall has received complaints." "Complaints?" Arthur set down the stone he was holding. "From who?" "Several people. They say the wall could be dangerous, that if it collapses it could hit the road, could hurt kids passing by." "This wall is being built on my own property, more than 50 yards from the road." Arthur kept his voice calm, but he could feel the anger building. "And it's being built with proper technique." "You're not a stonemason," another man pointed out. "How can you guarantee it's safe?" Otis, who was sitting discreetly in the shade of a tree pretending to just rest, spoke up. "I can guarantee it." Everyone turned, surprised by the old man's voice. "Mr. Otis?" Clint seemed genuinely confused. "Are you involved in this?" "I'm not involved in anything." Otis leaned on his cane to stand up. "But I've got eyes in my head. That wall is being built the right way. I used the same technique on my own property 40 years ago. It's a retaining wall that holds up my terrace. Not a single stone has ever fallen." The men exchanged glances, unsure what to say. "Either way," Clint cleared his throat, "the town hall is sending an inspector to evaluate it. If he determines there's a risk, you'll have to tear it down." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. An inspector meant bureaucracy, possible fines, delays he couldn't afford. "When's this inspector coming?" "Tomorrow, probably." The men left and Arthur sat down on a rock, his head in his hands. Otis approached slowly. "Don't worry, son. The wall is well built. No honest inspector is going to find a reason to stop it. And what if he's not honest? Otis shrugged. Then you'll have to fight a different way. That night, Arthur barely slept. Clara stayed up with him in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea she'd made herself. Dad, what's going to happen if the inspector orders it torn down? I don't know, sweetheart. Arthur stirred his tea without really drinking it. Honestly, I don't know. We could talk to him, explain the situation. Men like that inspector don't care about our situation, Clara. They follow orders and rules. If someone with influence asked him to find a problem, he'll find one. That's unfair. Life is unfair. Arthur finally took a sip of the tea. But we can't give up because of that. The inspector arrived at 10 o'clock the next morning. He was a slight man with glasses, carrying a clipboard and a camera. Arthur received him with forced politeness. Good morning. I'm here to do an inspection of the wall being built here, the inspector said formally, as if reading from a script. Go right ahead. Arthur accompanied him to the structure. The inspector measured, photographed, took notes. He checked the distance to the road, examined the foundation, tested the stability. Arthur watched in silence, his heart racing. After nearly an hour of inspection, the inspector finally spoke. I see no technical irregularities. The structure is solid, within your property, at a safe distance from public roads. There's no legal grounds for a stop work order. Arthur felt his legs almost give way from relief. So I can continue? You can. The inspector put away his clipboard. But I'll leave an official recommendation. Put up a temporary safety fence while you're working. Just to prevent accidents. It's a precautionary measure. I'll do that. When the inspector left, Clara came running out of the house and hugged her father. We did it. We won this battle. Arthur hugged his daughter. But the war goes on. And it did go on. That afternoon, Arthur received a call from the county medical center. The voice on the phone was a nurse he knew. Mr. Arthur, the doctors would like to speak with you in person tomorrow morning. It's about Mrs. Martha's condition. Has she gotten worse? It's better if you come here to talk. The nurse didn't want to give details. Arthur spent another sleepless night. Early in the morning, he went to the hospital with his stomach in knots from anxiety. The doctor taking care of Martha was direct and didn't beat around the bush. Mr. Arthur, your wife's situation is delicate. The treatment she needs is expensive and urgent. Without it, I'd give her at most 3 months. With the treatment, her chances of recovery are good, about 70%. How much does the treatment cost? The doctor wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Arthur looked at it and felt the world spin. It was exactly the amount Silas had offered for the land. I don't have that money right now, he said, his voice faltering, but I'll have it soon. The harvest. Mr. Arthur, she doesn't have time to wait for a harvest. We need to start the treatment within the next 2 weeks. Arthur left the hospital like a zombie. He went into Martha's room, where she was sleeping deeply, sedated by the pain medication. He held her hand, so thin it looked like it could break. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I can't save you faster. But then a voice inside him rebelled against the resignation. No, he wasn't going to give up. There had to be another way. Arthur left the hospital with a new plan in mind. He went straight to the Heartland Bank and asked to speak with the manager. Mr. Arthur, the manager was a young man uncomfortable with the situation. Your debt to the bank is high. I can't authorize any more loans. I'm not asking for a loan. Arthur leaned forward. I'm asking to renegotiate. Give me 3 more months. If I don't pay by then, you can take the land, with higher interest if you want. But I need that time. The manager shuffled papers, clearly trying to find a way to help. I'll be honest with you, there's external pressure for us to foreclose on your mortgage quickly. Someone with influence wants this property freed up soon. Silas Sterling. I can't confirm or deny, the manager lowered his voice, but I can try to get you 60 additional days. That's the most I can do without higher authorization. So I'll have 90 days in total? That's right. But Mr. Arthur, be realistic. What can you do in 90 days that will generate the money you need? I'm going to plant, Arthur stood up, and I'm going to harvest the best crop this region has ever seen. The manager seemed genuinely pained, as if he were listening to a madman pronounce his own sentence. Arthur returned to the property more determined than ever. If he had 90 days, he couldn't waste a single second. The wall needed to be finished in at most 40 days to leave time to plant and harvest. Otis was there, as always, pretending to just watch but actually supervising every stone placed. "I need to speed things up," Arthur said to the old man. "A lot." "How much time do you have?" 40 days to finish the wall and plant, another 50 to harvest and sell." Otis let out a low whistle. "That's tight. Really tight." "Impossible?" The old man looked at the wall, already almost 7 feet tall in some spots, then looked at Arthur. "If it were impossible, I wouldn't be here helping. But it's going to require sacrifice. I'm already sacrificing everything. Then you're going to have to sacrifice more." Otis turned to leave, but stopped. "And Arthur, when you prove everyone wrong, don't rub it in their faces. Humiliated people become your enemies. You're going to need these neighbors as friends in the future." Arthur thought long and hard about those words that night. Otis was right. Even if he succeeded, he'd have to live in that community afterward. He couldn't make enemies. The following days were a blur of brutal work. Arthur woke up at 4 in the morning and worked until he could no longer see the stones in the darkness. Clara helped him after school, carrying water, organizing tools, making food. Caleb showed up occasionally, always silent, watching from a distance. He never helped, but he also stopped criticizing openly. Arthur took that as small progress. The wall was growing, but slowly, very slowly. Arthur calculated and recalculated. If he kept up the current pace, he wouldn't finish in time. That's when something happened that he didn't expect. It was a Saturday morning when the pickup trucks started arriving. First one, then 2, then 5. From each one, men got out carrying tools. Arthur looked at Otis, confused, and Otis smiled his toothless smile. "What's going on?" "Word travels fast in the countryside, son," Otis waved at the men. "You've been doing honest work. No complaining, no giving up. Some people respect that." One of the men approached. Arthur vaguely recognized him. He was a relative of someone in the region. "Mr. Arthur, I came to help with the wall. I can't stay long, but I brought 3 friends. We're going to work today and tomorrow. I can't pay you." The man raised his hand, interrupting. "We don't want payment. We want to see if this wall actually works. If it does, we're going to build one on our land too." Arthur felt his eyes sting. For weeks he'd been mocked, criticized, ignored. And now people he barely knew were offering free help. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. With the volunteers' help, the work advanced exponentially. What would have taken weeks was done in one intense weekend. By Monday, when the men left, the wall stood 8 feet tall and covered 2/3 of the planned length. Clara prepared a special lunch to thank everyone. As they ate together under a tarp they'd rigged up for shade, one of the men commented, "Mr. Arthur, you know that even with the wall, you're still going to need rain at the right time, right? This year's forecast is dry." "I know," Arthur chewed slowly, "but if at least the wind doesn't carry everything away, that's half the problem solved." "And irrigation?" "I'm going to use the well." Arthur pointed to the old well at the center of the property. "I already tested it. The water's still clean and there's enough volume." The men talked about irrigation techniques and shared experiences from previous years. Arthur absorbed every bit of information like a sponge. He was learning more at that lunch than in years of trying on his own. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. That afternoon, after the volunteers had left, Silas showed up again, this time without warning. "I came to see this famous wall," he said, walking around the structure with his hands in his pockets. "Impressive, truly impressive. You're stubborn, Arthur, I'll give you that." "It's not stubbornness. It's necessity. Call it whatever you want." Silas stopped and stared at him. "But you and I both know this still doesn't solve your problem. You have debts that need to be paid in cold, hard cash. That wall isn't going to make you money. The harvest will." Silas let out that short, humorless laugh. Even if that wall works, even if you manage to plant and harvest something, it won't be enough, not in time, you know that. Arthur didn't answer, because part of him feared Silas might be right. My offer still stands. The merchant pulled a card from his pocket. In fact, I'll even do better. I'll pay 40% more than what I originally offered. That's enough money to cover your wife's treatment, with some left over for you to start over somewhere else. No. Arthur, be reasonable. Think about Martha. I think about her every day. Arthur felt the anger begin to boil, and I know she wouldn't want me to sell our legacy, our future, just because things are hard right now. Future? Silas pointed at the arid land. What future do you see here? This land is doomed. The winds aren't going to stop. A wall isn't going to change the climate. It doesn't need to change the climate. It just needs to create a different microclimate, one that's protected. Silas studied Arthur for a long moment, and for the first time he seemed genuinely curious. You really believe that, don't you? I do. Then you're a bigger fool than I thought. Silas put the card away. But I'll tell you something. When this fails, and it will fail, my next offer will be half of what I'm offering now, and you'll accept it because you won't have a choice. After Silas left, Arthur stood looking at the wall for a long time. It was beautiful, in a rustic, solid kind of way. Each stone had been placed with care, with intention. It was more than just a physical barrier. It was the embodiment of his refusal to give up. Clara approached from behind and touched his arm. He's wrong, Dad. This is going to work. Arthur wanted to believe with the same certainty he saw in his daughter's eyes. He wanted to have that unshakable faith. But the truth was, he was afraid. Afraid that Silas was right. Afraid that all that effort would be in vain. That night he had a dream. He was standing on top of the wall looking out at a lush, vibrant crop, gently swaying in a soft breeze. Martha was by his side, healthy and smiling. Caleb was there too, looking proud, and Clara was running through the plants, laughing. He woke up with the first ray of sunlight and knew what he needed to do. He had to finish the wall, he had to believe, he had to bet everything on that single move. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of his life. Arthur practically lived on that wall, sleeping only 3 or 4 hours a night. Otis came by every day, supervising, correcting, teaching. Clara missed school twice to help during the critical moments, and then, miraculously, the wall was finished. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Arthur placed the last stone on top of the structure. 3 meters high, 150 meters long, forming a solid and imposing barrier that ran along the entire northern edge of the property. He climbed down from the makeshift ladder and walked away to see the wall from a distance. It was magnificent. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, but it had a raw, honest beauty. It was physical proof that determination and hard work could create something real and tangible. Clara came running and hugged him. "We did it, Dad, we did it." Arthur hugged his daughter, and for the first time in months, he let the tears flow freely. Tears of exhaustion, of relief, of hope. Otis approached slowly, leaning on his cane, and touched the wall with his hand. "Good work, son. Your grandfather would be proud if he were alive." "I couldn't have done it without you, sir." "You would have." Otis smiled. "It would have taken longer, you'd have made more mistakes, but you would have done it. You have the stubbornness it takes." That night, Arthur kept the promise he had made to Martha. He borrowed a wheelchair from the hospital and took his wife to see the wall. She was very weak, barely able to keep her eyes open for long, but when she saw the stone structure lit by the evening light, her eyes filled with tears. Arthur pushed her close to the wall and stopped. Martha reached out a trembling hand and touched the stones, feeling the rough texture, the solidity. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's just a pile of rocks." Arthur knelt down beside her. "No." Martha looked at him with an intensity that contrasted with the weakness of her body. "It's proof that you never give up. It's proof that we can build something out of nothing when everyone says it's impossible." She began to cough, and Arthur realized he needed to take her back. But before they left, Martha asked, "Promise me that when I get out of the hospital, I'll see crops growing behind that wall." "I promise," said Arthur, and he desperately hoped it wasn't a lie. With the wall complete, Arthur had exactly 35 days to plant, cultivate and harvest before the debt came due. It was impossible by normal standards, but he was no longer playing by the normal rules. He talked to Otis, who knew old techniques for accelerating growth using specific fertilization and controlled irrigation. He talked to the men who had helped build the wall, who pointed him to seeds of varieties that matured faster. He spent his last savings on short-cycle corn seeds, bean seeds that promised a harvest in 60 days, and vegetable seedlings he could sell more quickly. The time to plant arrived. Arthur tilled the soil carefully, creating straight, organized rows. Clara helped him plant each seed with care, as if each one were precious. And they were. In the first few days after planting, Arthur barely slept. He checked the field several times a night, testing the soil moisture, looking for pests, adjusting the irrigation. And then the first seedlings began to sprout. They were small, fragile, bright green against the dark earth. Arthur knelt down and touched one of them gently, feeling an inexplicable emotion. Life. He was seeing life emerge where there had only been frustration and failure before. But the real test was still to come. A week after planting, the wind came. It wasn't a violent storm, but a steady, strong wind, the kind that usually ripped out young seedlings and threw dirt over the ones that survived. Arthur stayed up all night listening to the wind howl. Clara couldn't sleep either, the two of them sitting in the kitchen, waiting for dawn with a mixture of dread and hope. When the sun finally rose, Arthur ran to the field, and he was left breathless. The wall had worked. Behind the stone barrier, the seedlings were intact. They swayed lightly with a gentle breeze, but there was no damage. The strong wind, which he could see kicking up dust and debris on the neighboring property, broke against the wall and was deflected upward and to the sides. Arthur fell to his knees in the middle of the field, laughing and crying at the same time. Clara ran to him and the two embraced, dancing among the seedlings like children. "It worked!" Clara shouted. "Dad, it worked!" And indeed it worked. In the following weeks, while neighboring fields struggled against the constant wind, losing seedlings and having stunted growth, Arthur's field flourished, lush and healthy. The news spread quickly. Neighbors who once mocked now came to see with their own eyes. Clint was one of the first. "Arthur, I owe you an apology," said the neighbor, clearly uncomfortable. "I mocked you. I thought you were crazy. But I was wrong." Arthur remembered Otis's words about not humiliating those who were wrong. "Clint, you were just being realistic based on your experience. I have nothing against you. This wall—" Clint looked at the structure with admiration. "Could you teach me how to build one?" "Of course," Arthur smiled. "But the one who really knows is Mr. Otis. He's the one who taught me." Otis, who was sitting in the shade as always, nodded modestly. "I didn't do anything that anyone with common sense wouldn't do." Other neighbors began asking the same questions. They wanted walls on their properties. They wanted protection against the wind that had destroyed their lives for years. But not everyone was happy with Arthur's success. Silas showed up one morning, his face red with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted, pointing his finger at Arthur. "Planted?" Arthur remained calm. "You're influencing the others. All those fools now want to build walls instead of selling their land." "I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I just showed that there's an alternative." "You ruined my plans." Silas was beside himself. "I had agreements, verbal contracts, profit expectations. That's not my problem." Arthur crossed his arms. "Everyone owns their land. If they don't want to sell, you can't force them." Silas took a threatening step forward, but stopped when he saw Clint and two other neighbors approaching. "Any problem here?" asked Clint. Silas looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. He backed off, but before leaving he spat venom. "You still haven't paid the bank, Arthur. And when you can't, I'll be there to buy this land for a song. You can celebrate now, but the game isn't over yet." He was right about that. Arthur still had the Heartland Bank debt, and the deadline was approaching quickly. But the field kept growing. In 3 weeks, the corn was already half a meter tall. The beans were starting to flower. The vegetables were ready for the first harvest. Arthur started selling the vegetables at the local market, making money that, although modest, helped pay the daily bills. Martha's treatment continued, and there were signs of improvement. It wasn't a cure, but it was progress. Caleb finally came home. He didn't apologize with words, but he started helping with the crops, working in silence alongside his father. Arthur understood. Some apologies come in the form of actions, not words. One day, while harvesting vegetables together, Caleb finally spoke. "I was scared, Dad. Scared of losing Mom. Scared of losing everything. I thought you were being irrational, but I was the one who was blind. Fear does that to us." Arthur put his hand on his son's shoulder. "I don't blame you for anything." "You should blame me." Caleb quickly wiped his eyes. "I sabotaged you. That day some stones from the wall showed up out of place. That was me. I removed them during the night, thinking that if I delayed your work, you'd eventually give up." Arthur already suspected it, but hearing the confession still stung. "Why?" "'Cause I thought I was saving you from yourself." Caleb looked at the ground. "But I was just trying to force the easy way out. I'm sorry." "You're forgiven." Arthur hugged his son. "And now, let's work together. We still have a lot to do." The weeks went by and the crop developed beyond any expectation. The microclimate created by the wall not only protected from the wind, but also retained moisture more efficiently. The soil, which used to dry out quickly, now held water for longer. Researchers from the State Agricultural College in the neighboring region showed up to study the phenomenon. They measured temperature, humidity, wind speed, and compared it with unprotected plots. The data confirmed the wall created a significantly better environment for cultivation. A professor, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, was particularly impressed. "Mr. Arthur, what you've done here is traditional agricultural engineering at its purest. Techniques that ancient peoples used and that were forgotten with modern agriculture. You could give lectures on this." "I didn't do anything special." Arthur was genuinely embarrassed by the attention. "I just observed and tried to solve a problem." "That's exactly what sets good farmers apart from great farmers," the professor scribbled notes frantically. "The ability to observe, adapt, and innovate." The publication of the college's study brought even more attention. Reporters from regional newspapers showed up. Radio programs wanted interviews. Arthur turned down most of them, preferring to focus on the work. But he agreed to give an interview to the local community FM because he thought it could help other small farmers who were struggling the way he had struggled. During the interview, he was careful to give credit to Otis and the neighbors who had helped. He talked about community, about not giving up, about seeing value where others saw obstacles. The interview touched a lot of people. Arthur started receiving letters and messages from farmers in other regions facing similar problems. He shared everything he knew, keeping no secrets. Silas, seeing his influence dwindle more and more, made one last desperate attempt. He spread rumors that Arthur's land was contaminated, that the produce was unsafe to eat. It was a lie, and an easily disproven one, but it caused temporary damage. Some buyers became wary. Arthur faced it the only way he knew how, with honesty and transparency. He invited official inspectors to test the soil, the water, the produce. Every test came back negative for any contamination. When the truth came to light, Silas lost the little credibility he still had. People stopped doing business with him. Eventually, he left the region entirely, going to try his luck elsewhere. Finally, the time for the big harvest arrived. The corn stood tall and golden, the ears heavy and full. The beans produced beyond expectations. The vegetables had brought in steady profit throughout the weeks. Arthur hired workers to help with the harvest, paying fair wages. Caleb coordinated the crews with surprising efficiency. Clara kept meticulous records of everything that was harvested and sold. When they finally added it all up, they had enough money to pay off the Heartland Bank debt with a small margin left over. On the day Arthur went to the bank to make the payment, he brought Caleb and Clara with him. The manager was visibly shocked. "Mr. Arthur, I honestly didn't think you'd make it." "I had my doubts too," Arthur admitted, sliding the check across the desk. "But I learned that doubts cannot turn into paralysis. We need to act despite the fear." "That's a lesson I'll carry for life," the manager said as he stamped the documents. "Your land is paid off, and I want to say, Mr. Arthur, that it's an honor to meet someone with your determination." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Leaving the bank, the three of them embraced in public, not caring who was watching. Clara was crying with joy. Caleb had the biggest smile Arthur had ever seen on his son's face. But the greatest victory was still to come. That afternoon, Arthur received a call from the county medical center. This time the news was good. Martha was responding well to treatment. The doctors were optimistic about her full recovery. Arthur went to visit her immediately. She was sitting up in bed, still weak but visibly better. There was color in her cheeks, a sparkle in her eyes. "Tell me everything," Martha asked. "I want to know every detail." And Arthur told her. He talked about the sleepless nights, about the stones that seemed impossible to move, about the neighbors who mocked him and then helped, about Otis and his quiet wisdom, about the moment he saw the wall protect the seedlings for the first time, about the abundant harvest. Martha held his hand with growing strength. "I knew it," she said, her eyes shining. "I knew you could do it. I almost didn't. There were moments I nearly gave up. But you didn't, and that makes all the difference." A week later, Martha was discharged from the hospital. Arthur brought her home on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Neighbors gathered to welcome her, with flowers and food, celebrating not only her recovery, but also the rebirth of hope in the community. Arthur led her to the wall, now covered in climbing vines that Clara had planted at its base. The flowering plants softened the harshness of the stones, creating something that was both functional and beautiful. Martha touched the wall, then looked at the crops growing lushly behind it. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she said. "It's perfect." In the following weeks, life began to find a new rhythm. Martha recovered slowly, gaining strength day by day. Caleb enrolled in a technical agriculture course, determined to turn the lessons learned into formal knowledge. Clara went back to school but kept helping in the afternoons, already planning to study agronomy in the future. The neighbors, one by one, began building their own walls. Otis became an unofficial consultant, teaching the technique his grandfather had passed down to him decades ago. The region began to transform, no longer known as the doomed lands, but becoming an example of community agricultural innovation. Clint was one of the first to complete his wall. On the first harvest after its construction, his yield doubled. He organized a barbecue to celebrate and invited all the neighbors, including Arthur. "A toast," Clint raised his glass. "To Arthur, the man who taught us that the solution is sometimes found in exactly what we're throwing away." Everyone applauded and drank. Arthur, embarrassed by the attention, tried to change the subject, but Mrs. Gable from the general store asked to speak. "Arthur, I also want to apologize. I tried to discourage you. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but you showed us that sometimes we need to take risks to succeed." Others also shared their stories, their fears, their doubts that had been dispelled by Arthur's example. The party stretched late into the night, with music, dancing, and plenty of food. In a quiet moment, Arthur stepped away from the crowd and stood looking at his wall under the moonlight. Otis approached slowly, as he always did. "Proud of what you've built?" "Proud isn't quite the word," Arthur thought. "Grateful, maybe. Grateful for having had the stubbornness to keep going." "It's the right kind of stubbornness," Otis patted him on the shoulder. "The kind that builds, not the kind that destroys. You chose well. I wouldn't have made it without you, sir." "Nonsense," the old man laughed. "I just sped up what was already in you. The vision was yours, son. I only helped with the technical details. The following months brought growing prosperity. The second harvest was even better than the first, now that Arthur had a better command of the microclimate created by the wall. He experimented with different crops, discovering that some benefited more from the protection than others. Tomatoes grew particularly well, as did bell peppers and certain varieties of leafy greens. Arthur began to specialize his production, focusing on what yielded the best results. Caleb suggested the idea of forming a cooperative with the neighbors who also had walls. Together, they would have greater bargaining power with buyers. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and within a few months the Stonewall Growers' Coop was established, with Arthur as honorary president, even though he insisted he didn't want the position. "Dad, you have to accept," Caleb insisted. "You're the one who started all of this. People trust you." Reluctantly, Arthur accepted, and he proved to be a natural leader, always careful to listen to every member, to make fair decisions, to never use his position for personal gain. The cooperative negotiated contracts with markets and restaurants across the region. The produce, protected by the stone walls, gained a reputation for superior quality, grown with special care in a controlled environment. The prices they commanded were better than the market average. Everyone in the cooperative thrived. Clara, keeping her promise, became the cooperative's unofficial secretary, keeping meticulous records of every transaction. At 18, she was more organized than many seasoned adults. Martha, now fully recovered, went back to taking care of the house, but also started a small project of her own, a medicinal herb garden sheltered by an extension of the wall that Arthur built especially for her. "These herbs saved my life during my treatment," she explained to visitors. "Teas that soothed my stomach, that helped with the pain, that brought peace. I want to share that with others who are suffering." Martha's medicinal garden became famous throughout the region. She sold the dried herbs at the cooperative, but she also gave many away for free to those in need who couldn't pay. 2 years after the construction of the first wall, the region was transformed. What was once known as a failed farming area was now a destination for field visits by students and farmers from all over the country. The State Agricultural College established a permanent research program there, documenting the long-term effects of the walls on the microclimate and productivity. Arthur was invited to give lectures at agricultural events. He always accepted, but always on the condition that Otis came along. The two made an interesting duo. Arthur with his practical experience and determination, Otis with his age-old technical knowledge. At one of those lectures, a young agronomist asked, "Mr. Arthur, what was the moment you were most certain the wall would work?" Arthur thought for a long moment before answering. "To be honest, I was never absolutely certain. Up until the moment I saw the seedlings unharmed after the first strong wind, it was all faith and hope. But I think that's what separates giving up from persevering, keeping on, even without certainty, because the alternative is accepting defeat without a fight." The answer drew spontaneous applause from the audience. Caleb, who was in the crowd, felt pride swell in his chest. He remembered how he had doubted his father, how he had even sabotaged his work. The shame of those moments never completely left him, but he had turned that shame into motivation to be better. Now at 26, Caleb was the operations manager of the cooperative, respected for his efficiency and honesty. He had married a village schoolteacher, Sarah, who shared his passion for sustainable agriculture. Clara, at 19, was at State Agricultural College studying agronomy as she had planned. During breaks, she came back to help at the property and the cooperative, always bringing new ideas and knowledge. It was Clara who proposed the idea of rural tourism. Visitors paid to learn about the walls, about sustainable farming, and to experience country life for a few days. Arthur was skeptical at first, but Martha convinced him. "Darling, people need to see that hope still exists, that there are still communities working together. This is bigger than farming. It's about showing that another way of living is possible." Rural tourism was a surprising success. Urban families came for weekends, learning to plant, to harvest, to build with stone. Children who had never seen where their food came from were fascinated. One 8-year-old boy, the son of a big city executive, asked Arthur, "Why don't people in the city build stone walls?" Arthur smiled and crouched down to the boy's level. "Because the problems in the city are different, but the lesson is the same anywhere. Study your problem, look for resources others are wasting, and use your creativity to connect the two." The boy seemed satisfied with the answer and went back to playing in the dirt. 5 years after the original wall was built, Arthur's property was unrecognizable. What had once been arid, hopeless ground was now an oasis of green. Stone walls protected diversified crops. Young orchards were beginning to bear fruit. Martha's medicinal garden had expanded, becoming almost a small herb farm of its own. The house had been renovated and enlarged to accommodate the growing business. A new shed served as the processing center for the cooperative's products. Another shed functioned as a classroom for the rural tourism workshops. But the most important thing was less visible. The community had come together in a way no one thought possible just a few years earlier. Neighbors who once barely spoke now worked together, shared resources, and celebrated collective victories. Otis, now 78, still showed up regularly, though slower than before. He would sit in the shade and watch the activity, occasionally offering advice when asked. One day, Arthur sat down beside him, the two of them watching workers repair a section of wall that had given way slightly after a particularly heavy rain. "Mr. Silas, have you ever thought about how different things might be if you hadn't helped me that day?" "I have," the old man nodded. "And I think you would have managed anyway. It would have taken longer, you'd have made more mistakes, but your determination would have prevailed eventually." "I'm not sure I believe that." "Then you're underestimating your own strength." Otis touched the wall beside him. "These stones didn't lift themselves. Every single one was raised by your refusal to give up. I only taught you the technique. The strength was yours." That same year, the cooperative won a regional award for agricultural innovation and sustainability. Arthur had to give a speech at the ceremony, something that made him extremely uncomfortable. Martha helped him prepare, sitting at the kitchen table of the house they had almost lost. "Speak from the heart," she advised. "It doesn't need to be elaborate. Just be yourself." On the day of the ceremony, Arthur stepped onto the stage with his hands trembling. He looked at the audience and saw familiar faces, neighbors who had mocked him and then helped him, researchers who had documented the work, young farmers who had been inspired by the story. He took a deep breath and began. "6 years ago, I was about to lose everything. My wife was sick, my land was condemned, my children were desperate. Everyone told me to give up, to sell, to accept defeat, and part of me wanted to do exactly that." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "But there were these stones, stones that everyone threw away, considered garbage, obstacles to be removed. And I looked at them and thought, what if they're not obstacles? What if they're the solution?" The audience was completely silent, attentive. "This award isn't mine. It belongs to every person who picked up a stone and helped build a wall. It belongs to Mr. Otis, who shared ancestral knowledge. It belongs to my daughter Clara, who believed when no one else did. It belongs to my son Caleb, who learned that changing your mind when the evidence changes is a sign of strength, not weakness. It belongs to my wife Martha, who trusted me even when I barely trusted myself." Arthur saw Martha in the front row, her eyes shining with proud tears. "And it belongs to all of you here who face your own obstacles, your own stones. I hope our story shows that sometimes the solution lies exactly in what we're trying to throw away. Thank you." The applause was deafening. Arthur stepped off the stage quickly, embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply grateful. Life continued its course. The seasons changed, bringing challenges and rewards. There were years of abundant rain when the harvests broke records. There were years of drought when even with the walls it was difficult, but never impossible. Caleb and Sarah had 2 children, a girl and a boy, who grew up playing among the stones their grandfather had stacked. Arthur taught them the same lessons he had learned: observation, perseverance, creativity. Clara graduated in agronomy with distinction and returned to work on the family property, bringing scientific knowledge that complemented Arthur's practical experience. Together, they developed even more efficient techniques, always sharing openly with the cooperative. Martha lived to see her grandchildren run among the protected crops, to see the thriving community that had emerged from adversity. Her medicinal garden became a community project, with several women from the region learning and contributing. Silas was never seen in the region again. Rumors said he had tried the same scheme elsewhere and ended up in jail for fraud. Arthur didn't take pleasure in the news when he heard it. He just shook his head and thought that some people never learn. Otis lived to be 84, lucid and active almost until the end. When he finally passed, it was in peace, sitting under his favorite tree, watching the walls he had helped build. The funeral was a celebration of his life, with hundreds of people sharing stories of how he had helped, taught, and inspired. Arthur made sure there was a commemorative plaque on the original wall, in memory of Otis Miller, who taught that shared knowledge multiplies, never diminishes. Years passed. Arthur reached 60, then 65. His hair turned completely white, his body slower, but his determination never wavered. The cooperative grew to include more than 50 families. They expanded into olive oil, honey, and artisanal cheeses, always maintaining the principles of sustainability and community. Caleb officially took over as president of the cooperative when Arthur retired from the position. It was a natural succession, and everyone supported it. Arthur stayed on as a consultant, which meant he spent his days doing what he had always loved, working the land, building and repairing walls, teaching anyone who wanted to learn. On his 70th birthday, the community organized a big celebration. They set up a giant tent next to the original wall, decorated with flowers and lights. Hundreds of people came from all over the region. At the height of the party, they asked Arthur to give a speech. He hesitated, as always, but Martha gently nudged him toward the microphone. 70 years, Arthur began, looking at the familiar faces around him. It's been a long time. I've seen a lot. I've lived a lot. But if I had to choose the moment I'm most proud of, it would be the day I decided I wasn't going to give up, that I was going to take these cursed stones and do something with them. Laughter and applause echoed. I've learned that life is made of small choices that add up to big results. Every stone I lifted was a choice to keep going. And every one of you here made similar choices. You chose to build instead of destroy. You chose community instead of individualism. You chose hope instead of despair. He looked at the wall, lit up by the party lights, solid and eternal. This wall isn't just stones. It's physical proof that together we can overcome what seems impossible alone. It's the legacy I leave to my grandchildren, to this community. Not a legacy of material wealth, but of knowledge, of unity, of never ever giving up. The celebration went on until late. Music, dancing, abundant food. Arthur watched it all from a quiet corner, Martha seated beside him, hands intertwined. "Are you happy?" she asked. "More than I ever imagined possible," he answered honestly. "I still sometimes think about those days at the county medical center, when I thought I wouldn't see you finish the wall. And I think about how I almost sold everything." "But you didn't sell," Martha said, squeezing his hand, "and that made all the difference." Arthur's final years were peaceful and fulfilling. He woke up early, even though he didn't have to, walked the property checking every section of the wall with experienced eyes, talked with young workers who always had questions. He wrote a book at Clara's strong insistence, documenting not only the technique of building walls, but the entire philosophy behind it. The book became a reference in agricultural colleges, not so much for the technical details, but for the message of perseverance and innovation. Institutions from other countries began to take an interest in the story. Delegations from Africa, where strong winds also destroyed crops, came to learn. Farmers from arid regions of Asia sent messages asking for details. Arthur attended to them all with the same patience and generosity. He never charged for knowledge, never kept secrets. He believed knowledge was like seeds. The more you planted, the more you harvested. At 80, he still climbed to the top of the wall every now and then, now with Caleb's help, to take in the view. From up there he could see miles of land protected by similar walls, a green mosaic of prosperity that he had helped sow. "I never imagined I'd come this far," he once said to Caleb during one of those climbs. "You always underestimated the impact of your actions, Dad," Caleb said, adjusting his father's cap against the sun. "One stone at a time. You changed an entire region." "We changed it," Arthur corrected him. "That was never the work of one man alone." The end. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Arthur made the right decision in not selling the land? What would you do in his place? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories. Thank you so much for your company.